Welcome to This Life, the Chronicles of Autism Mums, hosted by me, Alison. Each week I'm joined by amazing women who happen to have autistic kids. Hasna, Moira, Suzana, Raana, Maha, Karina, Huma and Raana, our techie. Each week we talk about navigating the ups and downs of parenting kids with autism and how that affected us and our lives as women, mothers and professionals. Strap in, grab some tissues, sometimes you'll cry from empathy and other times from laughter. Join us on our journey of this life.
Following on from our first episode, we talked a lot about diagnosis, but we didn't touch on really the process and how it made us feel as parents and also as women. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think we'll make a start with a question about diagnosis. So do you remember your child's diagnosis? Do you remember how that kind of came about and where you were and how it made you feel? So let's get started. Who would like to share their experience?
Getting a diagnosis was not a simple process, but by no means for me, especially given that my son fell at the time into a gray area, because really the only thing I could pick out was the speech delay, and also because I didn't have something to compare it to. So when I was waiting for the skills to come, when I was waiting for mostly language, for him, it didn't come. And then there were all these, I'm going to call them weird things he would do, like interesting facial expressions, just always hum. And I thought, wow, he's so musical. Is that the Bob the Builder song? Things like that. But it was like on repeat, but no language. But he would pick out all these signs. So when I finally decided to see somebody, he was about to start preschool, and I was very worried because he was nowhere where the kids his age or whatever I could observe was. So I reached out to, at the time, I took him to a doctor here, the pediatrician, and she simply. My ex-husband took him to a doctor, and he simply brought him back with a piece of paper with a phone number and checked for possible ASD. I had no idea what ASD was, so I just put it in Google, and of course, dread, because I had already been Googling some of his symptoms, and autism kept coming back. Like, oh my God, like there's again the word non-curable, lifelong. It was like, no, it's something else. It's just language. We can do something. So I did go to that psychologist at the time, which took about 5 minutes. Like literally, I went there to get him tested, but within 5 minutes, he's likely on the autism spectrum. And I don't think I even wanted to continue at that point. I was like, no, he's not. In my heart, I was like, no, like, how can you drop a bomb like that on me? And I remember like going home, like putting him in the car from that visit, and just, it was a very heavy feeling of, I really just wanted to drop on the floor and just, I was like, what am I about to go through here? What is this? Like, how is this possible? And mind you, at the time, I knew very little about it, and I knew very little people that even, actually, none at the time. Now it's, it's easier for parents getting diagnosed because they know where to reach out. There's groups, there's several service centers and whatnot. But at the time it was like, okay, this is scary. And first thing I did was find a speech therapist. But then until then, I didn't have a formal diagnosis. So I flew to another country, and they ran ADOS, which is supposed to be the golden standard. But even with that facial, my son barely made the cutoff line. So he was still, because he had a lot of skills. He had joint attention, and that's really what happens with kids that are like on the more, I would say, mild, if you want to say, because mild is not really mild, even though people say, oh, it's mild, it's not severe, but mild is also a struggle, because it doesn't mean that they still can't function in everyday settings and mainstream and all of that. And so at that point, he's not, and I was like, oh, he's not. There was a name, there's a lot of names in the DSM-5, and said, we're just gonna like keep pushing. I did not wait to give him services. Finally, I got my diagnosis when he was 6 in the US, because they were the only ones that were able to They ran several tests, and again, it was such a gray area, but I think because we don't want the name, that's the thing. Like, we're okay with the condition, we don't want the name. And I think just because there was so much stigma attached to it. So for me, it was like, I'll go with anything that is not that. I just don't want to put that on my son. And I mean, eventually from then on, I kind of made peace with it. And when I started embracing the word and the diagnosis, I think I was really able to live a better life, let's say. Of course, it wasn't that simple. I mean, it took many years to finally embrace it. But that's what diagnosis felt like. It really did feel like a tragedy, I have to be honest. It was a very difficult news to take in at the time. Just because we didn't know what to expect. And if I go back, I don't know what the expectation is. This was completely foreign. This is your baby. It's 2-year-old. You know what I mean? What do you mean his life just began? You know, does he get a chance at life? And these are all the thoughts that were coming through my head in that period.
Karina, how was
your
diagnosis? That's great. Thank you, Hasna. How did it make you feel?
It was same thing, same feelings. We didn't know anything about autism, anything. I didn't know any child with autism, any person, never. I had never experienced anything close, so it was very new to us. And the way we found out it was autism, our pediatrician referred him to a clinic here in Qatar because he thought it would be also hearing problems. So he said, take him to this clinic and he can have an evaluation assessment and see. So for me, we had the hope that could be something related to his hearing. And it was a speech therapist who saw him. And then she said, after 5 minutes, she asked me a couple of questions. She interacted with him a little bit. And then she said, oh, it's autism. And it looks like he's going to be nonverbal. But don't worry, you know, we have a treatment for that. And there is a PAX. It's a card, so you can talk through cards. And I remember, you know, it's been, I think, 9 years since we got the diagnosis. And I remember her face, the time, the smell of the room. I mean, it's like my brain took a picture of the whole moment. You know, I can remember what she was wearing, you know, even the jewelry that she was wearing, everything, because it was such a shock. Yeah. And I remember we walked away. It was me, my husband, and my kid, and my other twin in the room. We put them in the car and we were mute until we got home. We couldn't say a word. And all we could think was, of course, when we got home, we both cried and we said, what is this? What's going on here? How about his future? It's all we could think of. And how rude she was, how unprofessional she was to break the news like that, you know, like, take it. This is what he has.
Mm-hmm. I find it's quite interesting actually that your two stories, and you know, I think even if we asked everybody that was in this on this podcast today, that because I can certainly resonate with that your stories do sound very, very similar in the way that you and it's not necessarily what they were saying to you, but actually how the message was delivered was a lot, and you know, there's obviously some trauma there because you can remember all of those things, Karina, and I can as well. So I think it's very interesting that, you know, just with a group of us here, what you can you know, how that kind of felt for all of us. I'm wondering, do you feel that the diagnosis process considers the parent at all in the delivery? You know, do you that you don't? So would anybody like to tell us how they feel about that?
I want to say something, but it's not directly answering your question. I feel, so my journey, by the time I got to an actual psychologist and, you know, went through the diagnosis process, like I had already been doing therapy for ages. And the only reason why I tried to go get it official at that point was only because I wanted to go through and try with the insurance to get them to pay for it. And the only reason I tried to do that at that point, which was years later, was because I found out somebody who had similar insurance to mine had it covered. And we had like a crazy, awesome insurance that like insured you for every other thing. But so the painful part for me was the journey before even that. It took me about a year of running around. I remember it as running around as a headless chicken because I didn't know where to go to. I wasn't suspecting autism at all, even initially, because my pediatrician kind of was indirectly pushing me to figure something out. And eventually, a year later, when I went back home to Jordan and I saw a pediatrician there, and he told me I'm suspecting some autistic tendencies, I came back to our pediatrician here, and I just told him, why don't you just tell me? Like, that was exhausting. It literally took me a year. And he just kind of told me how he had horrible experiences talking to parents about this. And so that's why he kind of kept indirectly pushing me to figure it out. So anyway, when I saw the pediatrician in Jordan and he told me, he was very professional compared to also the speech therapist that I had seen the year before, which I mentioned in the last episode, who completely like diagnosed them within 40 minutes with ADHD and went into making me feel like a horrible mother because we had the discussion of, do I choose English or Arabic? And at that point, Victor was speaking some words and they were in English. And he made it seem like if I choose English, I would kind of be taking the easy way out. And if I choose Arabic, it would be more difficult. But in the long term, since we're Arabs, that it would be better for him because, you know, this is where we live, basically. And so like going back to how I was feeling, because like I remember in his office, I was kind of like in shock. And it is trauma. It's definitely trauma. I remember, it might be a silly story, but where Victor was trying to play around because he's bored of the conversation, obviously, and went and picked up the landline to play with the phone. And he basically yelled at him. And I know he probably thinks it's his like ABA thing, but he kind of like yelled at him and he's like, see, and then Victor started crying and came over to me to hug me. And then he was like, why are you hugging him? Did he do anything that deserved a hug? Like kind of like he's like, you know, he went very, very hardcore with, you know, you need to, if we're going to do it in Arabic, you need to remove him from any place that is not speaking that language. If his nursery is in English, you need to pull him out. If your friends are only speaking English, find new friends. Like he went very kind of like extreme. And it was like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? It was terrifying. But like, that was the first experience with the first person. Fast forward the 1 year of trying to find out where to go and what appointments to do and all that. And when I did get an appointment, which I had to wait 4 months for through the public healthcare system, the doctor who saw him actually said, I don't think there's anything wrong with him. Because again, like Hasna said, he's kind of on the milder end of things. And although that is a blessing in many ways where, you know, they do maybe have it a little bit easier than maybe kids with more severe symptoms, it really makes me sad because I feel they fall through the cracks all the time. And it's such a struggle because you need to keep on, you know, fighting for them over every little thing all the way through. So anyway, eventually the pediatrician in Jordan who said, I see some autistic tendencies, went on and said, having said that, I'm not the person who diagnoses this. You need to go to a child psychologist, blah, blah, blah. And he explained the process. He gave me a name of a person back home who had a center. I went to her, and she actually wasn't a psychologist, but she's the owner of the center, and she, I think, was like a speech and some other, I forgot what her title was, but in any case, she told me I'm not the one who does this type of diagnosis, but I can diagnose like what skills, you know, that he needs and where he's at from a speech point of view, and like even like OT and stuff like that. So then we started intensive therapy for the few months that I was home for the summer. And, you know, he kind of was skyrocketing, like his progress was crazy, and it made me really, really, really happy. But then I came back and it took me some time to get services for him again. So eventually, once I got that, you know, and we were doing therapy for years, it was only because of the insurance thing that I tried to, years later, go back and try to get like an official diagnosis. And that was like a very short, quick trip to the child psychologist here. And I don't know, I don't know if it was, you know, done all the way it was supposed to either, to be honest with you. It just kind of felt like, I don't know, they just asked some questions, and I don't know, it just didn't really feel like what it was supposed to be like, just because we've already been on the journey and been doing therapy. So it almost felt like, based on what we were saying and how he was previously, they kind of did it. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it was, the pain for me was the few years before even getting there.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I wonder whether or not our fear is related to a diagnosis. You know, I wonder whether or not, you know, what is that stereotype that we fear so much about autism when we don't know about it? Like, we know the word autism, but before you're in this, on this journey, you know the word autism, but why do we relate it to negativity? What do we relate it to? Because we know so little about it. But it's interesting as to why we relate that to kind of, you know, that negativity.
Negative connotation.
Exactly. Yeah, Maha, what do you feel about that? Is it related? Do you think the fear is related to the actual delivery, or do you think it's related to the unknown? What do you think?
Totally the unknown. My fear when I heard, like when I was told my son had autism, wasn't how can I say, it wasn't that it wasn't that label as much as it was, well, what does that mean? And I think families, when they get that diagnosis, they sort of need to prepare themselves for having so many people give their opinion, especially health professionals, that shouldn't be saying things. And you really need to develop that thick skin where you're like, that doesn't sound right, I'm going to turn the page and go to someone else. Whereas I know in the beginning it's really quite overwhelming and frightening. I'm sure it just sounds like a common theme where, you know, out of the 10 health professionals, probably one was the one that was like made sense to you, and all the others just made things so much worse. And I think that's the fear, is that you don't have one person, or even like when I took my son and it was like this top developmental pediatrician in Australia, and we had to wait 4 months to get in to see him, and the assessment was done over 2 days, and at the end of it was like, well, here's a piece of paper with a list of services. And I'm like, but what does my son need? And he goes, oh, any of those things. And I'm like, but again, this spectrum is so vast. What do I work on? And not even this developmental pediatrician could tell me. And he's like, oh, put him on fish oil. Okay, so what type of fish oil? What? And he's like, oh, yeah, just anything you can get. I'm like, what world am I in right now? Like, it was just not having any information. For me personally, I didn't have that, oh my God, my son's got autism. My grief was like taking a Band-Aid off slowly. Like, I started with, okay, what do I have to do? And as I was going along, every now and then you'd get this feeling of grief of what's going to happen to my son, what's going to, how bad is this going to get? And then I just go straight back into, okay, what do I have to do? And the problem is what do you have to do? No one is telling you what you have to do. You're sort of going into this blindly going, I have no idea, but I know I'm the one steering the ship. Especially the mums tend to be more the project managers in all this. They're the ones, our husbands or our partners are usually the ones saying, okay, what do you need from me? And we're the ones making the choice. And all of that, I think, is so, I think that's the stress. If you have a child with a condition where, you've got to set, say, for example, if it's diabetes or it's something, of course, that's difficult, but there's a process you go through. There's a blood test you take, and there's a quantitative measure of what your child has. Whereas with our kids, we don't have that, and we don't have any idea what's going to happen. I remember my pediatrician also said, I don't know where he got this statistic from. 10% of the kids fall off the spectrum at like age 7. And I was like, I'm going to be one of those 10%. My son's going to be in that 10%. I have found absolutely no statistic saying that 10% of kids. I feel like 10% of kids just weren't diagnosed properly or whatever. Like, you don't know where that statistic comes from. So you get all this information and you're trying to process it all. And I think, the message is probably more, you will hear so many things. And as a mum, your child, you've got to trust that instinct where you know your child better than anyone. And if it doesn't sound like your child, you know what, move on. Like, turn the page, find something, and not out of denial, just out of that gut instinct of, this does not feel like what my child needs at the moment. So that would be my...
Yeah, I think, thanks for sharing, Maha. And I think you've made some really, really good points, because it seems wherever we are in the world, your son was diagnosed in Australia, Suzana, we were talking about Jordan, we can talk about the UK, we can talk about anywhere, but it seems that the system is, I think, kind of broken. Like, a lot of systems are broken, but it seems very broken because the reason that you guys have all been through such a journey pre-diagnosis was because it didn't feel right to you. And I think that we can all say on here today that we've all been through that same process, because it didn't feel right. The delivery wasn't right. It didn't sound like your child. And even though you knew something was up, the information that you were being given didn't fit correctly with, how you felt. So I think it's always, you're just constantly searching for answers. So with that being said, Moira, what did you find the most frustrating thing about the diagnosis process for you? What was, and then we can talk about, after we hear from you, maybe we can start thinking about what we feel how the system can benefit, what we can make as suggestions to help parents, but also to help, make suggestions as to how delivery can be improved from a professional perspective. But, what was the most frustrating thing for you?
Well, to be honest, many people have told us that Callum's on the spectrum, but we've never actually gone through the official diagnosis. We've never paid for that bit of paper. So by the time Callum was 2, we had probably self-diagnosed. In the back of our minds, we thought he had. And every time we went and had some kind of assessment, part of me was gutted to be proved right, and the other part was kind of in denial, because he also was kind of in that grey area, I thought. Thought it was just a speech delay, and constantly just waiting for that magic switch to flick and everything would be fine. So, and I think I don't have a defining moment. I think, to be honest, I've blanked out a lot of those years. And I think, we knew deep down, but we just kept on going for more and more assessments, for willing that person to tell us what we wanted to hear, probably. But at the end of the day, we took the advice of spending the money on addressing his issues as opposed to getting the diagnosis. So we went through all the therapy, and he made the progress. So I don't know how I felt. We just, obviously you think, what on earth did I do probably in this pregnancy that I didn't do in the first one, because it didn't happen the first time round. But you can beat yourself up till the cows come home. There's no answers. And every therapist you go to be fair, they're also not able to give you any definitive answers. So for the beginning years, I felt like it was kind of the blind leading the blind, and we were just doing kind of the best we could, whatever we thought. So the whole thing was frustrating. There wasn't one aspect that was more frustrating than the other, I think.
So Moira, did you ultimately go for a non-diagnosis just purely for the fact that there wasn't a requirement. Because I know in other countries that you need to get that piece of paper to get services.
I think if we were in the UK, for example, and we needed to get services from school, then it's a requirement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Here, obviously, it's different, so we didn't feel the need.
And I think that we can all agree that with diagnosis or no diagnosis, if you are seeing professionals regarding speech therapy, occupational therapy, the treatment would be exactly the same. So those therapies would be the same if you had the diagnosis or you didn't. There's nothing that can harm your child from not taking that diagnosis, but having those, having that piece of paper. So Moira, kind of stepping back and taking a look back at, your decisions and everything else, is there anything different that you would do about the process and how you've managed the journey? Because it's all such a personal journey, isn't it? We all make those decisions based on, how we feel at the time, emotions, but also what we know is best for our child as parents and, as mothers. So is there anything that you would change or do differently?
Well, hindsight is great, but at the time, I don't think I could have done anything differently, really, because there wasn't the knowledge. I didn't know anybody. I had nothing to compare it to. If it was to happen now, obviously it's everywhere. There's websites, podcasts, help groups, everything everywhere. So I think, I don't know. I think we did the best we could at the time, to be honest. I like to think we did the best we could.
Yeah, of course.
I just tell myself.
That's a good thing. No, that's an amazing thing. And I think as time has, over the last 10 years, things have improved so much in terms of awareness and, acceptance and people talking about it more, which is amazing. So, more information is available. So we know more, we do more because we know more about it. And, what do we all think that we would change about the system? What recommendations can we make? What would you like to see, apart from all of the support groups and everything else? We are talking about the delivery of, a team of professionals. We all know that this diagnosis takes a multidisciplinary team. We know that in order to get insurance or whether or not to get statemented or write an IEP if you're in other countries and so on and so forth, we all need to get this piece of paper. But, it sounds as though from all of our collective, global, international experiences that, it's been quite a process and quite a journey to get there. Should it be like that for parents? How should it be like that? And how can we suggest that we improve that, and how can we make it easier on parents? Because ultimately it's tough. It's a very, very tough and, just a journey that you don't really want to be on. So how can we make it easier and better and more positive? Because we're all talking about inclusion now, we're all talking about the world being more inclusive for our children, and it starts there. It starts with the diagnosis. And, if we've got professionals that are not considering that, then that's where it should start. So how do we all feel about that?
I don't know how health visitors in the UK are positioned now, but I feel that if mine had been more knowledgeable, she could be the one who would have guided me through a process. And I think it's just such a struggle in the UK because of resources and the amount of people needing to go through the process. It just takes so long. So I don't know if that's anything we can do. It's a government.
But also it sounds to me like, all of our experiences collectively were based on not just the information that was being delivered, but how it was delivered and with the confidence that it was delivered with. It's kind of like such a grey area, and it seems, people are too worried. Even Suzana's case, they were too worried to say something, say something wrong.
So that's what I would say. Like, I think physicians regardless of whatever experiences they've had, like they should be required to deliver that news if they're seeing it. Like it's not an option of whether, you know, I'm trying to nudge you slowly in whatever way, you know, because that was a whole year. Like if I had known, that was from the age of about 2.5 till 3.5. That's like prime time for early intervention. So yeah, I think physicians maybe need to be trained on how to deliver this type of news. And I think there should be some kind of aspect that there might be some support for parents to guide them through it, not for whatever center they're in, but just the general process, what to expect, what to look for. And it would, you know, be a nice touch if they could then have all the information, whether private or public, for each category of therapy or whatsoever else that's available, where they could just literally give you all that information instead of you running around for God knows how long to try to get it. So definitely there's
And
something to be
wasting very precious time for intervention.
Definitely.
And that seems to be very common. It's, I don't know, it's very cultural too. I mean, it's like the doctor doesn't want to break the news. They don't want this responsibility, but then, you know, you're delaying services, you're delaying anything. And I'm not saying, and also the way you break the news, you know, there has to be streamlined. There has to be a process where the parent is given the news, but is also given the support, is given the referrals, is given the, you know, you start with this, you know, almost like the doctors themselves don't know enough. And also, who diagnoses autism? Who diagnoses? Is it the pediatrician? Is it who do we go to? Because until now, with the new families that I observe every day, it's like they don't know who exactly can diagnose and who cannot diagnose, and who, like you had a speech therapist, you told me. The speech therapist should not be diagnosing autism. It's not within their scope. It's in their scope to support kids with autism, but diagnosis is not in the scope of a speech therapist.
He diagnosed him with ADHD, not even autism at the time, and he's not diagnosed, but he doesn't have an ADHD.
There you go.
And he was only 2 at the time. I don't think you can diagnose ADHD at that point, which of course I didn't know that then, but I think they need to be like at a school age. Yeah, so definitely an interesting experience.
Heather was diagnosed around 2.5. He was the only child. He was the firstborn, and we had just moved to a new country. So, and I wasn't interacting with a lot of people, and I knew something was off, but I thought that, oh, maybe he's just taking time growing up. You know, he's just. I had no idea there was such a thing as delayed or other terms, and then he had peculiar, then like from when he was a baby he was fine, but then around 2.5 he started withdrawing into himself, and we still didn't think there was anything wrong, but then his pediatrician pointed it out that, oh, he might be autistic. And I was like, oh, okay, I wonder what is autism, you know. She was like, he might be autistic, just have him checked. And we had no idea. We thought this, I remember my husband saying, oh, we can fix it, you know. So we had no idea what journey we're going on. In a way, I sometimes think maybe it was a blessing because it didn't come as a big blow to us. We were just sort of eased into it, and slowly when we read about everything, we came to realize that it was a lifelong thing. So basically that's how the diagnosis was given to us by the doctor. And then later on, as the other people in this group said, that it's there were not a lot of services available. We had to do a lot of research and find therapists on our own. We were lucky that we found some really nice ones, and they worked privately with my son. It was very expensive. The insurance doesn't cover it. So at one point we had emptied our bank accounts, paying for therapy. But then I think we had faith that it'll somehow will, because we were just thinking this is important. These are the years, because that's what we were hearing, that initial few years, that's the time when they need the therapy the most. So we were just focused on that, and then I think that's what our life became for those number of years. That's all that went on in our lives, the therapy, the how he's improving, the assessments. We got I think a couple of assessments done. I think there wasn't anyone guiding us. We even went to England to get an assessment done, and now I think about it, that maybe it was not. We didn't have to do that. Like, we paid £4,000 for just 1 hour session, and I was thinking, oh, that's a lot. And nothing happened over there. They just told us, yeah, your son is autistic. So
it's just a confirmation. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's how it is for people who come outside the countries. Rates are different. So anyway, so yeah, that's how our initial journey was. Maybe for a long time I was not in denial, but sort of not detached also. Like, I just feel that maybe I was just standing somewhere and observing also this, and while I was in it also. So maybe that sort of cushioned me from the shock, and I didn't go through any. It didn't affect me as greatly as it should have. I don't know. It just cushioned me, so I'm grateful for that.
Do you think your body had a kind of built-in coping mechanism? It was just your body and your mindset, your way of coping with, a situation that you didn't expect and something that you didn't know about?
Yes. It's just because I didn't want to. I cannot function if something is in the severity of a situation, that this is something very serious and it's life and death, and I can't function that way. So I just taking one day at a time and just making light of the situation and seeing humor in all of that. Like my son, he has a really dark humor. Example A behind me. So it's just, I just take it as it goes. It's funny, and I'm embarrassed most of the time by his antics, but it is what it is. So we just take it how as it comes.
I think it's lovely.
That's what the approach has been.
I think it's lovely, and I wish I had a little bit of that. I took it. I think all of us had. It was, even though I was going through massive depression, but I think all of us, what we share in common is that we were still getting the work done. We did not wait a day, So this is, I think, something that, we're dealing with grief, we're dealing with, in your case, you were cushioned, as you say, amazing. I wish I had, I developed it over time, almost like, how do you say, self protection mechanism. And, hence when my second son, it was very different, but also because we know so little. But having said that, Alison, you had also a tough experience getting diagnosis, and I think we should hear about it. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, I think my experience probably on the trauma scale was probably exactly the same as everybody else's. So I doubt very much, unless you've had a very exceptional experience, then if we polled all autistic parents in the world, then they would probably, wherever you are from, I would absolutely be sure that everyone has this level, because there seems to be a lot of confusion around, there's not a clear path for us. So a lot gets missaid and delivered in the wrong way. For me, we realised very early that our son, I think he was 18 months, when we first realised that he wasn't communicating. And communication has always been his biggest challenge. So we went to a doctor here who basically delivered the message that potentially he was on the spectrum, and I wasn't really given a clear path or advice, and we're from the UK, but we don't live in the UK. So my first I don't know, port of call was the UK. I was like, right, I've got to go home. I've got to go figure this out. There must be a clearer path there for me. So I remember going on my own with my son, and I'd called around in the UK to different, the health service and everything else, and got back, went to see I don't even know what they're called. There's so many people that, on this multidisciplinary team. And I think it's changed like 5 times. That's actually the problem as well, that it keeps changing. So people really don't know, in these massive teams of NHS staff, you don't really know, they don't even know where they should recommend that you go next. So we went to see a play therapist. So apparently that was the first start for us, was to go see a play therapist who would kind of point us in the right direction. They saw him, and they said, there's nothing wrong, nothing. He's developing typically, he's playing normally. And this was like at the age of 18 months, 2 years. And we know that in the UK and at the time, we were doing our own research. My husband was back at home doing so much research on this to just try and figure out, what we did. And he was like, no, we need to wait. They don't diagnose, I think in the UK, until the age of, probably the minimum age is 3 to 4. So I came away from that not actually thinking, yay, there's nothing wrong with him. I came away frustrated thinking, there's something wrong here. And if you don't know that there's a problem, how am I supposed to know if there's a problem? And where am I supposed to go next? I trusted the system, but you're telling me there's no issue. So, and that's exhausting. And I think that I spent 3 days in bed after that, because I only had one child. And I think my mum my mum has been a great support right the way through our journey. And she really kind of understood, I think, and she'd never seen me in that situation, because I've never felt like that in my life. In my entire life, I've never felt so, can't think of the word. I think so unable
helpless,
to deal with the situation. Totally helpless, totally. I could not fix that situation with an action, with money, with calling somebody in, nothing. And I think the most frustrating thing was that was the case. It was the unknown. It was like, well, I'm, as I think I said last week, I'm staring this child in the face. Every minute of my day is with him. So I'm looking at the problem. And I don't mean I'm looking at my child, his problem. The problem is there. The issue is there, the one that's making me so upset. And I'm talking about it from a very personal perspective. I don't mean to be, it's all about me. It wasn't, but actually at the time it felt like it was about our family. How can we possibly make these changes to get this right? Because ultimately, I think at the start of a diagnosis, you just want to fix your child, which is not right. But at the time, that's all you know. We didn't know anything about, acceptance and inclusion and all of that. We're just trying to make this child, like our other child, develop typically. And when you don't know where to start, you don't get any positive feedback from professionals, but there is something wrong, then I think you just go into crisis mode, because it's just a very dark place. It's a very horrible place to be. And I really don't wish it upon anybody, and anyone that I meet now, just because of the work that we do, who's in that situation, because you can see, and it affects people in so many different ways. And I wouldn't wish this upon my, at the time, my own worst enemy, because I think it's just a a horrendous place to be. You know, you're just at the start of the journey.
You're in that grey area, yeah.
Exactly, it's awful. I mean, now it's totally fine, but now I can look back and think, okay, well, you know, this is where we are. We have good days and bad days, but we do with all of our children, and it's fine because we know what we know now.
Exactly. And I think, Alison, just to say, that's the thing, is that is for us, our journey started off with a big shock. Is this something that can be, you know, fixed? Is this something that professionals need to take into account? Because like, you are shocking these parents into grief.
Yes.
And they have this crazy long journey ahead of them. Is this the way to do it? And also with what we know today, 10 years on, I mean, we're all kind of, let's say, grateful for our journey, because we were able to like pivot and you know, just make the best out of it. If there was somebody compassionate breaking this news, explaining what you need to do, setting you up with support group, providing you with enough resources, like, is it that difficult to do that? You just need to, like, you know, tell the parents that's it. And then, you know, I mean, Moira was mentioning that I do something wrong with my pregnancy. You know, this is so common for us to like self-blame and to say, what did we do? Did I eat the raw fish or you know what I mean? Like, that's how bad it gets. Like, I kept wondering, what did I do to cause this? What did I do? Was I depressed during my pregnancy? Was I, you know, which I was. But I mean, that's the thing, is that nobody is breaking this down in a human way, where you're thinking, this is a parent and this is a baby, you know, nothing more, like, there's nothing more painful than, you know, it would have been less painful if they gave me news about myself, but then this is your baby. So I think until today, I feel like doctors, whoever, are not taking this into account. Like, there needs to be, when you drop news like that, you need to have a whole support system ready to go along with that. Has this been the case? I feel like it's not. And then, and I think that's bottom line, is as mothers, we have this intuition. I think all of us have said, we knew something was wrong, and the physicians were saying, no, we knew. If you know, I think that's, nobody knows more than you. I remember a friend telling me, you trust your gut, keep looking, because you feel it, you know it. As a matter of fact, that was the case. But how much time was wasted in order, and don't forget, parents don't get services. In most countries, they don't get services until they get a referral or whatnot. Is it okay to waste that precious prime time, as Suzana said, where we can get our kids into something? So a lot has to change in the diagnostic process.
Totally. So thank you very much for joining us all this morning. It's a really interesting topic. We'll be back next week with another episode. And please visit learnautism.com, www.learnautism.com, for more information about diagnosis. It's very important, actually, that I mentioned this morning, because there are a lot of parents searching for information, and it's a really, really great resource. So learnautism.com, go check it out, and it can help, and the aim of it is to actually help a lot of people on this journey and on this path. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.